I mean, it's part of the anarchist philosophy. If people are starving, you don't write a letter to your congressman. The idea of direct action is that if people don't have enough food, you take it.
And we are recording and ready to go. Oh, what is this? Come on. It is September 15th, 2011, and this is The New Architects, and I'm Jason.
And I'm Thomas. Hello.
How you doing, Thomas?
Hey, Jason. Good. Good. How's your week?
It was good. Well, you know how my week was. I was with you.
Yeah, true. True. It's good. We finally went to Twin Oaks.
We did.
And that's going to be the bulk of this episode will be discussing Twin Oaks, but also having Twin Oaks represent itself. I have a show tomorrow night playing acoustic with an old bandmate from Inquisition days and current bandmate Mark, who lives in Richmond. Strike anywhere the other boys are out of town, living where they live. And but what this means is that there's going to be an hour of acoustic protest punk music that I'll be singing. So by this time tomorrow night, I will be like, hello, or worse.
And that's why we're doing the show.
Excited. That's why benefits for the. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's why we're doing the show now, so we can understand you.
Yeah. Yeah, it would just be like the Crypt Keeper tomorrow night. But Richmond IWW are doing a big organizer training seminar at the Wayside Center for Popular Education, which is at the base of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Faber, Virginia. The Wayside Center for Popular Education is a New Architects episode in itself, but it basically organizes and trains people to organize for civil rights and human rights and labor rights and a better way for living. And it's modeled after the Highlander Folk Schools, which was the training ground for the civil rights movement. But this particular one will focus on giving workers the tools necessary to organize in their workplace. And there's also a bag lunch campaign that's in Richmond that the Wobblies do every week, and it's focused on informing workers of their rights, letting them know that they're also able to form unions, and that a union by definition is two or more people working together for a common goal. And it's a sort of concerted action that is protected in all workplaces, and letting people just kind of have a moment of solidarity where they can talk. And obviously at first, like a lot of folks that haven't had exposure to grassroots international union work are going to be scratching their heads thinking, like, what's the catch, or, what does this mean, or how does this affect me? Especially temp agencies, and I think that's an interesting thing. It's a more modern exploitation version of an old wage slavery. But city, state, and private contractors will utilize temp agencies, like the ones I've worked for, like the job I almost had in Norfolk. That I didn't take because I had to leave because it was going to be insane. Working on the armor of tanks and Humvees as some kind of like steel cleaner on the Navy base there, and I was having a hard time struggling with whether to take that job or not. It wasn't much of a struggle. But temp agencies will often pay more to the agencies than they pay permanent workers, of course, to avoid having to pay benefits, pensions, etc., which is the rallying cry of all good capitalists. Keep cutting benefits and pensions forever. The workers have to sort it out. But the way the workers are going to sort it out is probably not going to be what the bosses think will happen. There'll be a lot of organizing. There'll be a lot of outrage. And there will be a parallel world that will give birth. And I don't mean this in like some kind of turn of the last century bloody Marxism. I mean that there's a way for humanity to transcend the space by listening to each other, by fighting through these walls that are built. Because I'm one of those people that do believe in a system, and I don't necessarily believe that there is a back room of, demonic entities, CEOs and lobbyists and politicians all morphing into the same creature. I think it'd be a lot easier if I did, but I do think that there's engineering, a social engineering that takes place, and that tries to keep us all separated and to keep us all petty and selfish and scared and tired and exhausted, and that we can only see the world in one way. But for some workers, temporary employment is about possessing control of their one commodity, their labor, which can allow them to choose when and where they work on a day-to-day basis. However, there's no reason for the current configuration of a capitalist temp agency acting as the middleman between the contractor and the workers. I guess the industrial workers of the world and international labor itself is trying to transform and educate within temporary workers. The idea that a worker-owned and operated temp agency, where all the money is paid by the contractors, gets distributed by the workers to the workers, that can agitate and have its own power and have its own negotiating rights, would be extremely important. There's also traditionally the least touched by other organized labor, other union groups, because it's not a blanket trade, and it's a lot of exploited folks who have been underserved by education and maybe even are out from incarceration. So that is what the Richmond Wobblies, the IWW, are going to be working on, and tomorrow night shows a benefit for that. So yeah, I've been learning old songs and thinking about this. It's going to be exciting. And I think a lot of my family's going to be there, including my mom and dad,
Awesome.
who went with us to Twin Oaks.
Yep. That was an awesome trip, and I wish I could make it to that show. Tomorrow, but I can't. We live miles away.
I know you'll be missed. But
I'll be there. I'll be there in spirit, I guess.
Absolutely.
Solidarity. I'll do my own union organizing here in Norfolk.
Yeah. It's going to be neat because I'm going to pay my dues tomorrow as well to my delegate Kenny Yates, who's going to speak and talk more about this and the Wayside Center for Popular Education and the organizing and the training seminar that's going to happen there too. But so if anyone's interested, if you're listening, it's www.richmondiww.org, and it'll take you to the International Wobbly IWW website as well. So just check it out, see if any of the projects interest you, and you can get involved, and just to know that it's out there, and it has a lot more activity and inspiration and visibility now than in a long time. So I'm really, as always, proud to be a member, proud to be a part of it, and think that it's not the only tool or solution or analysis, but it's a good one, and it's one of the many things in the toolbox of new architects that should exist for sure.
For shizzle? I don't even know why I said that.
Just to keep it gangster. I know how you need to roll. Norfolk, son.
Yeah.
We should have a little bot that appears on the screen that says, off the rail, back on topic.
Yeah, but we need one badly. But the topic of this episode will not be the IWD, but that will be another show in itself.
Yeah, that was a little taste. That was more of like what's going on this week with Jason and Thomas segment. I know people dig that.
Yeah, that's the only reason they listen, if they listen.
It's fun now.
Yeah. But and when I say we, my family and your family, me and Miley, your mom and dad, all took a road trip to...
Yes, we did. We left Richmond on last Saturday afternoon and arrived in that very same afternoon, 45 minutes later, at Twin Oaks.
Yes, and Twin Oaks is an intentional community. They're 100 people strong. It's in Central Virginia, and it's made up around 85 adult members and 15 children. The community started back in 1967, and their way of life reflects the values of cooperation, sharing, nonviolence, equality, and ecology. You can check out their website at twinoaks.org. It's twinoaks.org to read more about them. But we went out there because we were always talking about communities and eco-villages. Mainly when I talk about eco-villages, I reference to the one that I held true to my heart, which is the Finland, or Finhorn. I don't know why I said Finland. Finhorn. That's how close to my heart that I hold it.
I back Finland as well.
But Finland's awesome, but that's a different story. But Finhorn in Scotland, because that's where we stayed the night before, during, and after I got married to Miley. And it's one of the oldest eco-villages in the world. And which is a different story. We'll talk about that later. Twin Oaks is very similar, but holds a lot of different characteristics to it. Their main source of income that keeps their community thriving is that they build hammocks. They make their own tofu, and they make their own tempeh and
Sausage.
their tofu sauce. There's vegetarian sausage, which is vegan, and they also have a vegetarian pate, which is like a wild mushroom. And they sell this. They have a history of selling their hammocks at Pier 1 until Pier 1 stopped doing hammocks. They decided to switch producing tofu, and it's been doing really well for them. And so we took a tour, which was, 3 hours long?
Well, it was 3, and then we had an extra hour
so it's like
with Shao,
Gilligan's
our
Island.
tour guide.
Yeah. So it was a 3-hour tour. Yeah, so that was bad.
It was like an island of sorts.
Yeah. Which was very enlightening and very inspiring. And I don't know if in the interview we actually get into it, but the concept of Twin Oaks came from the book Walden 2. And which was funny in the interview. I know we I get the interview and the tour mixed up what we actually talk about. But I find it interesting that they threw away a lot of the teaching to what they've taken from the book and only kept with a very small fundamental value of it.
Well, they definitely are anti-dogma. Like they don't. I mean, it's just almost a point of pride that they don't teach from any book. Like the book that is written is just with putting the one foot in front of the other. Like you kind of make the road by what works and how much compromise they can do to satisfy the 100 members. But to do it, as far as the planning manager system, I think that's still something B.F. Skinner developed. They kept that, and that's the unique and time-consuming computations of labor credits. And in the interview with Shaw, he's going to talk a little bit about that too. But it definitely has to do with everyone planning their work week and a diversity of tasks. They do the tofu in the hammock, but they also there's permaculture gardens. There's other agriculture there. They have animal husbandry. They have chicken and they have cows and have a lot of land. And they also have people that are in infirm, and they're building which is really exciting. They're building a state-of-the-art new hospice in there because some of their members are getting older, and I don't know, it's everything that it seems like, you get the feeling that, wow, they've thought of everything, and as a community, they've thought of it, and they've spoken about it clearly, whereas in our compressed and compartmentalized everyday lives of ones and twos or nuclear families, sometimes people don't talk about that stuff, or it's just a headache that we put off for later, or, it's like the way that it works there, it's not an ideology. Like there's a lot of them, but it's if the ideas are good and the ideas can work, that's what they do. So I thought that's what I took away from my impression of it. And of course, we'll talk more about that later. But it definitely was. It felt like it was bright and shining. It was a big light of the time in Twin Oaks, and it's really, I don't know. My mom said it reminded her both of the organizational quality of the orphanage that she grew up in the 40s and 50s, as well as almost like had a monastic, quiet quality to it, where everyone was kind of absorbed in meditating on the day. I wonder if that's just because Saturday everyone was hungover and asleep. I don't know.
Oh, I guess we'll never know unless we go live there. But in the interest of time, because we do have a lot of interviews on this show that we need to get going. So in the interest of time, let's jump into the interview with Shaw, and so he can tell us more about their economics government and what they believe in and how they function. So,
brilliant. Here's Shaw.
Here it is. And then we'll be good. All right, we're here at the Twin Oaks community. We're sitting here with Shaw, and he's going to give us a kind of a rundown of what the Twin Oaks community is. So when did the Twin Oaks community start, and what brought it together?
Twin Oaks community started in 1967, and I'm told that it actually, the people who started it came together at a conference up in Boston that was going to be about behavioralism, I think. and that they met up there and decided that they were going to want to start a community. And they lived in D.C. for a while they were organizing and trying to figure out where, and they eventually found this land. The behavioralism aspect, they were originally inspired by Walden 2, which is a book by B.F. Skinner. The behavioralist factor fell away after, in the first couple of years, and we dropped that. But you can see how the structures of the community, the labor system, for instance, in particular, it still comes out of that book and works pretty well.
Would you be able to describe just what was the inspiration behind trying a behavioralism approach, and then what happened to make you all retreat from that or implement different ideas?
Well, I wasn't here then. I've been here for 31 years, but the place has been around for 44 years, and that all happened before I got here.
So you couldn't speak to that?
Nope.
Okay.
How you doing? So you've given us a tour of the place, and it's very beautiful, and I love how you have the economics, the government of, or for lack of a better phrase, of how it's set up. It's different from other places that we've talked about previously on this show. Can you give us a kind of a rundown of how it works and the balance that you make sure that the community makes sure stays there?
I didn't quite get the last question, but I mean,
Just overall how
it stays there.
well how it's important to keep the balance with everything. You were talking about how you have the deciders, the planners.
Oh, right, the governmental system, sure. It's what we call a planner-manager system. It came out of the book, and of course, the book was this vague sketch. So we got the concepts out of the book, and then we came up with all the details ourselves. So we have work areas. We have, certain kinds of work, warehouse or milking cows or processing food or doing the garden, or making the tofu or making the hammocks. You notice the work areas are not just income areas. They're work areas. Some of them are income and some of them are domestic. And each area has a manager or a group of people who manage it, and each area is assigned a budget by, of a certain number of hours they can spend and a certain amount of money that they can spend in a year. And they arrange the work to happen within those budgets. And then questions that go beyond a particular work area are handled by the planners. Planners are 3 to 5 people who volunteer to do this job for, ideally a year and a half. It's about as much as anybody can handle before they need to get out. It's a high responsibility job, so there's only so long you can do it. It's quite interesting. I've done it, but it also can be quite stressful in controversial situations. And those 3 to 5 people will make decisions based on their best understanding of what the community wants. They do lots of input. There's lots of, papers that people write and get comments on, and face-to-face meetings of whoever wants to attend a meeting. And all of this is participated in by however many community members want to participate in it. It is not required that you participate in government. There are people who just don't participate in government at all. It's like, I don't want to do that. Whatever your decision made. But then if you don't participate, then you can't be grumbling later about, I think you made a lousy decision. If you do that, people are going to say, well, you should have participated. And all of this is done by these people who do these jobs. It's hard to get people to take on plannership. Some people's an important aspect of this is that while we are not a straight-up democracy where we vote on things and go with the will of the majority, instead we have these decisions made by managers and planners who are certainly aware and try to take into account what most of the people in the community want, but they also are trying to take into account the minority and what they want. So they're not, you don't have the tyranny of the majority in that way. And at the same time, Some people say, oh, well, you're down in democracy. You know, these people could be grabbing power and doing all kinds of stuff. No, they can't really. For two reasons. One is that formally there is an override process. If somebody thinks a decision was bad, if it's a managerial decision, they can appeal it to the planners. And if it's a planner decision or a managerial decision that they took to the planners and then they didn't like what the planners decided, they can appeal it to the population as a whole. They can put up a piece of paper. They say, I think this is a bad decision. Who agrees with me? And if over half of the full members sign that piece of paper, the decision is changed. So there's a democratic override. It doesn't happen very often because the people who are making decisions are trying to make them in accordance with what the community wants. But it's important that it exists.
It's almost like a reverse veto. Instead of one person having that power,
Yeah.
it's the majority, everyone having that power.
There is another important aspect, which is not formal. These people live with us. They don't want to piss us off.
Yeah.
Right? This is not somebody who lives in some mansion on the hill and doesn't have to look at the rest of us. They eat lunch with us.
You have to sit across the table from that person. If they're upset with the decision, you are actually living it. And
right. So we have both formal and informal checks on balance, on power, and that's important. And I think it's a better decision than a straight-up democracy, because in a straight-up democracy, if you get enough people excited about something and voting for it, it can happen. And those people may not have paid much of attention to what are the consequences of this.
Yeah.
They're just like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. Sure, go ahead and do it. Oh, wow, does that? Didn't think about that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a better system than that, and effectively a democracy.
And I like the fact that you said one of the key things that you want to make sure people understand when they come to this community as a resident is that you will compromise on things. There is definitely compromise on everybody. Could you explain that and go into detail?
Well, you're living with 100 people, and you're going to have quite a variety of points of view. I mean, they all came to live here, so it's not like it's a complete, just random across the board slice of American population. We have a lot in common, but we differ about a lot of things. So anytime a question comes up, you're going to have a fairly wide range of opinions as to what you do, and because we want to keep everybody feeling like their opinion is valued, we're going to try to come up with a decision that takes into account that broad range of opinions. And that means we're not going to go with just one particular point of view on it. And so while ideally we arrange that any significant group of people's opinions don't feel like they were completely ignored, and that they felt like their opinions were taken into account, not just the lone person off who has an opinion quite different than other people's. We have to ignore that. But if you have a significant number of people who think something, that has to play into what the decision is made. But that means that some other group of people who have a significant opinion don't get exactly their way, right? So that's where we compromise on everything. If you have any kind of controversy, you're going to end up with a compromise between the various points of view. To a purist, that can be really hard. If you're a purist and you feel like, oh, but this particular thing really needs to happen this way, because it's really important. And if you don't do it that way, it's really going to be bad. You know what? You're not going to get your way, even on things that are really important to you.
Yeah. I think a good example, because I think if a lot of people have a hard time understanding the compromise on values that they have, and a lot of people that I've come in contact with, when we talk about such subjects, they do get defensive about it, and they say, well, this point of view has to be that way. But here at the community, you have a perfect example of that, and I think it manifested in something really beautiful when you were telling us about the children area, and the people, some of the community wanted to have a living quarters or a building that was off the grid, and also there was a part of the community he wanted that area for children, and so there was that.
Yeah, so we built a building that was half and half.
Yeah.
We literally compromised. The building is literally split down the middle with a staircase, and on one side is a very child-focused group of people, and lots of kids spend their time there. Even kids who don't live there spend their time there. It's very organized that way. And on the other side is a group of people who are very focused on being careful about their power consumption so that they can live off the grid, to the point that sometimes they run out of electricity and then they use candles, you know. Now, this is just their bedrooms. It's not like they don't have toilets, but, you know, and they use a composting toilet for a lot so that they minimize their use of water to some degree, and all of that. And they're also child-friendly. That was part of the agreement. Some children live in that space, too. So, yes, it was a good example of community compromise. They didn't get exactly what they wanted. The people who wanted, you know, a building off in the woods that didn't even have any plumbing or electricity at all didn't get their way. But we ended up with something that was off the grid because it had photovoltaic electricity, and people living there who have low wattage everything. You know, if you live there, you have to compromise. You know, you have anything in your room that takes very much electricity. So everything is geared in that direction.
With this really shining example of consensus and compromise being woven into the fabric of the way everyone has input, but you also seem to somehow you're able to emphasize and encourage innovation and ideas, and that would require a lot of focus at the same time. Like you have a lot of photovoltaic power here, and you seem to have innovated the industries that happen here a lot, and I know it's based on input, and decision-making process always involves a lot of folks, but it doesn't seem like you are in some kind of still point about anything. Like there's still growth and transformation and evolution and like a lot of exchanges of good ideas that people have, and it seems like everyone who has a positive contribution, it gets heard. It doesn't get swept under or hammered out in bureaucracy and forgotten, and it seems like that's, I don't know if that's a part of the decision-making procedures that you use to emphasize and encourage ideas and innovation, or if that is just the awesome organic exponent of having this system in place.
So
people feel listened to, and then ideas that are good don't get lost.
People do feel listened to. We do try to use ideas that are good and have, you know, fit with what we're trying to do as a community. Lots of people come up with lots of ideas that don't go anywhere because we're not ready for that particular thing at that particular time. We're a bunch of people who have, you know, and who are interested in trying new things. That's, you know, I mean, to move here, you have to be interested in trying new things, right? You're leaving your job, you're leaving your place of, you know, where you live. Everything changes. You come here and you have a new job and a new place to live and a new bunch of people, and you've left all your friends behind. I mean, you know, they can come and visit you, but you're not living with them anymore. You have to be ready for the new. So a lot of people are here and they're interested in new. Well, you know, you can't change everything every week. You can't even change everything every year. One of the things I say to people is, you know, you come here and you will have all these ideas, and the community won't change fast enough for you to have your ideas come in fast enough to suit you. It will change, but it'll change slow because you have 100 people to convince. Just because you and your 5 friends think this is a wonderful idea doesn't mean it's going to happen. But you can advocate for it. You can try to convince people, and you can try to see how it can fit into the fabric of the community and where the community is going. And sometimes you can get your idea through. All right? Sometimes. And it will take a long time. We do have a bureaucracy. We don't have a leader. We don't even have a group of elders who leads. We have policies and government. We have bureaucracy. It's our bureaucracy. It's not somebody else's bureaucracy. It's personal. The people who are running it are our friends. And it's still a bureaucracy. You need to want an idea to go through, you've got to write a paper, and you've got to listen to the input, and you've got to modify your idea, and you've got to go to meetings, you know, and if you get that far, then you're doing well, because the idea didn't die yet. And you've got to go through all this, and you've got to listen to all these people who have doubts about your idea, and you do have to go through bureaucracy. And if you persevere long enough and you're excited about it enough, and it's an idea that catches the interest of enough people in the community, then you can get it through. and it'll take a long time. You have to be patient, right? It won't change as fast as you want it to change. And then some things will change that you wish wouldn't change, right? So we keep that in mind, we keep that in mind. And I should say we don't use consensus. We try to approach it as much as we can, but we do not use consensus. We do not let one person block because they don't want it to happen. If we did that,
Nothing would get done.
nothing would get done. Maybe if we were extraordinarily good at it, we could figure out how to make that work. But we don't, in fact, do that. So I want to be clear about that. Some people come in and really think we ought to use consensus. We do not do that. But we try to get as many people to agree as possible. We care about what people think. We care about the minority. But we're not going to let one or two people stop us.
What do you think is the biggest misconception people have of Twin Oaks community?
Well, that's one of them. People come in and say, you don't use consensus? But consensus is the way to do anything. It's like, nope, we don't do that.
Yeah.
We move in that. We try and get as far as we can go in that direction, but we don't do formal consensus. Nope, we don't do that. So that's certainly one of them. There's all kinds of other misconceptions. People hear, people who. It depends on what you mean. You mean by people whose, relatives are saying, well, you live in a commune? Oh, my God. Does that mean A, B, or C? No, it probably doesn't mean any of those things.
Well, just
but
the people who come here to want to be a part of the community is like within even like the animal rights community or whatever, there's people, because I worked for PETA for 6 years previously, and one of the biggest misconceptions people came into that organization was that it was just a dog and cat loving, hugging, but not an activist group, not a group. So is there like a lot of people who come in and are kind of thrown off because they have some kind of preconceived idea of the way the community should be and they end up leaving? Or
there are people who think that we're going to be more politically active than we are. We're primarily focused on making this work. There are people who are politically active, but not very much of that. Mostly we're focused on making this work. And we have the concept that we want to be an example of how people can live differently and, live cooperatively and share income and have a lighter footprint on the environment, because, we share our cars and we share our buildings and we, get, raise a lot of our own food, and what we buy comes in large packages rather than small packages and all of that. But we are not going to satisfy the extremists. People who are basically homesteaders and think that you should never buy anything are not going to be happy here. People who, want to, eat their meals at McDonald's are not going to be happy here either. We compromise. We try to be as much as we can for a broad range of people.
Do you have is there a formal system of affiliation with sister intentional communities?
Yes, you may have heard of the Federation of Egalitarian Communities.
No, I have.
This is a group of maybe half a dozen communities that are what we call egalitarian. Basically, that comes down to income sharing. Income sharing is a big step. To not have your own income, not have your own house, not have your own car, that's a big deal. Not very many people are ready to do that.
Especially for Americans.
Yeah, especially Americans. There's huge benefits, and there's huge drawbacks for your average person, right? And that's what we do. We don't have that. People can have a little money here and there. I explained that earlier in the tour. It's not on this tape, but people can have a money balance, a small amount of money that they can use when they're on vacation or to use to buy things the community doesn't provide. But basically, most of the money we generate goes to the community, and the community provides all of our needs, provides all of our housing, all of our shelter, all of our food, all of our medical care, all of our dental care. All of that stuff is provided by the community, and in turn we give almost all of our income to the community in that way. And because it's shared, there's a lot of economy of scale.
Yeah, one of the difference between here and Finhorn that we mentioned off the air was that in Finhorn they actually have their own banking system and currency, and here you had this similar concept of the money share, but you don't have a banking system or currency. Why was that taken? And can you give us more insight on how the money is shared and put back into the community?
Well, the money is shared in the sense that all of the income, almost all of it, I mean, minor exceptions here and there, goes to the communal funds, and then the community decides how that's going to be spent. So you don't get control of that. Your particular, priorities may not be, probably won't be satisfied as well as you would like because you're compromising with 100 other people. And so we do, but we share, and in that way, it's like, when I mean, it doesn't cost us nearly as much to feed ourselves because we buy food in bulk when we buy it, and we raise a lot of it ourselves. It doesn't cost us as much to run our cars because we got, people doing the mundane work. I mean, if it's complex, we might send it out to be fixed, but a lot of the, the routine maintenance is done here. All of these things don't cost as much. We also don't. We also have a. You mentioned earlier about affiliation with other groups. The Federation of Egalitarian Communities has a you could call it a catastrophic health care system, where if some really big expense comes in, the groups pay in a certain amount by some formula that I can't give you, but it's designed to be basically fair in some way, based on how many people you have and how much money you have and so on. And then if you can make claims on it. So we have our own insurance system in a sense, but it's only for big claims. It's not for small claims. So we have that as a cooperative thing. We have what we call labor exchange, where people can go to one of these other communities and work and get labor credits. So that if I went to East Wind, which is a community in Missouri, and did work there, then that would count towards my labor balance. I think something that hasn't come up in this interview is that we do our labor. Everybody needs to average a certain amount of labor per week, and I think currently it's 43.4 hours. But it's done as a balance in the same sort of way that money balances are kept on the outside. We have labor balances. So if I earn 60 hours in a week, then I get 17 whatever hours in beyond that goes towards my positive balance, and then some other week I can do less work or go on vacation or something like that. Well, so we have this labor exchange, so if somebody goes and visits another community, then they can get credit. But the communities have to keep it balanced, right? So you can't just have one community constantly getting people in and not giving out. They have to give as much as they receive in terms of their balance. So we have labor balances. And this is something that is very handy. We also have a system where, which is not used so much, but is very handy at times, which we call personal service credits. Say I want to fix up my room. I'm not a good carpenter, right? It would take me a long time to build that loft or whatever it is that I want to do. So I go to somebody who's a handy carpenter. They can do it in a jiffy. And I say, I'd like you to build this loft for me. And you can take credit for it, and the hours will come out of my labor balance. What we call personal service credits. Somebody's doing a personal service for me, and I am paying them out of my labor balance. Very handy at times.
Which they can apply for their vacation or for whatever they choose to.
Yes, they get labor credits for it just like they would get labor credits for anything else. They write it down on their sheet, and they did this many hammock hours, and they did this many tofu hours, and they did this many cow milking hours, and this many garden hours, and this many personal service credits from Shaw. And it counts, just like everything else counts.
I really like the system that you have set up. It's very, very fascinating. I want to learn more about it, but I think Tom can.
Oh, just a quick one. I've noticed that there's this sort of undercurrent of like positive psychology, and it seems like, I don't know if it's just like a natural aspect of the cohort of folks that would be interested in coming to live in an intentional community. Like you said, that sometimes it's just the collateral culture or personality type. But like you were saying, you're the manager of the hammock industry, and so for the longest time, the traditional way of making a hammock was weaving it, hanging from a wall, and so that the hammock worker would just be facing the wall for like dozens of hours making this hammock. And there was something about it that you changed to make it a social event where it's flat or on a table and people are weaving it face to face, and it seems like that does a lot for people's peace of mind, and it stimulates new ideas, and it stimulates friendships and bonds, and even the absurdity of conversation working side by side, and just the way that things kind of riff off of each other. It's like the psychological jazz of that is really important. Jason and I know that because we worked some shitty jobs together, and a lot of our ability to be telepathic in some ways, as anarcho-journalists or whatever we do, is kind of built on that. Just the absurd conversation, the side-by-side nature of it. It's so much more important than just isolating yourself and staring at a wall and doing a task. And I guess it seems like that's not the only example of that where you've taken. And this whole place just oozes with positivity and light and laughter and joy. And it's not trite or sentimental, and in no way is it a commodity, even a psychic commodity of this place, but it is authentic. And I wanted to know how much of that is a part of the conversation that you have with the co-residents here.
Well, it is a lot of what you have noticed is because we are, you could say, worker owned, huh? Right? The people who own the place are the people who work in the place. So we try to set up the work so that it is as enjoyable as possible. Certainly that was done quite intentionally with the hammock shop. Doing the rope work for the hammocks was set up to be social. It was set up to be as much able to relate to other people while you're working as possible. And that's definitely part of that. People try to do that in other areas as much as they can. Some work is not as well suited for that. You have, physical isolation or noise or something keeping you from doing that. But even then, there is this, people are doing the work really for each other. So even if you're not able to actually be talking to people while you're working, you're doing this work not for some corporation who's taking the money and giving it to shareholders or keeping it, or the CEOs are keeping it in ridiculous quantities. You're doing it for people who you live with and who live with and work with and, eat your meals with and hang out with and talk with. So there's that sense of that. Now, it's for 100 people. It's not like they're all your personal friends, but some portion of them are, and the rest of them are nice people, even if you don't personally hang out with them. So there's definitely that sense. So as much as we can, we try to set it up so it's fun, and we try to set it up so it's bonding. And we, do our food processing sitting around a table and chatting. So that's another example of where that happens. It happens in the hammock shop. It happens in food processing. And people who work together often hang out together. Because they've gotten to know each other.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to hanging out with you. We've taken up a lot of your time this evening, and I'm definitely grateful for it. I've learned a lot from everything you've showed us today and talked to us about. Is there anything that you want people to, like a website, like Twin Oaks community.org?
Yeah, twinoaks.org is our website. And you'll see a lot of things there. You'll see a description of our systems. There's a lot of what I've said will be, there. Of course, some of what I said is my personal opinion. I should make sure that I own up to that. But a lot of what I've said is information. You'll find a lot of that on the website. And you'll find it linked to various people's blogs and so on, and of course linked to our businesses, which Twin Oaks Hammocks and Twin Oaks Tofu are our main sources of income now. Though we also index books and do a few other things, yeah, definitely go to the website. If people are interested in possibly moving here, again, they can contact us through the website. There'll be a place to click for that kind of the visitor program, and you can write in and get in contact with us and start that up. People have to do a 3-week visit if they are interested in applying to join, and all of that will be explained on the website and by corresponding with our visitor correspondent.
Excellent. Well, I wish you the best in all your expansions and this community. Let's send our gratefulness to everyone here. Thank you again for taking the time to talk with us.
Sure.
Thank you, Shaw.
Mm-hmm.
So that was Shaw and the Twin Oaks community. And as he said there at the end, that I find it really fascinating how they set up the environment and the community in terms of how you go there and you stay, those weeks to learn everything that they do, and people can learn about you, and you spend time kind of getting the feel of it, and then they send you away so they can decide if you can become a member. And I like how they say that they don't want to ever turn anybody away, so that's why they send you away to review you so they don't have to kick you out. It's easier to accept in than it is to kick out, which I thought was really interesting how they had that set up.
Yeah, I think they showed us, as much as it was a physical tour of the land and the gardens and solar panels and the machine shop and the hospice and all the different living arrangements and environment and the kind of the peaceful productivity of that place. We also got kind of a psychological landscape tour and the way that has evolved. And I don't know, it was really open about the compromises, the decisions, the plans that kind of went somewhere and turned into something else, and then the plans that still haven't completely emerged from council and deliberation. And I don't know. I think the place speaks for itself too, but Shaw spoke really well for it as well. But so the reason we got excited about Twin Oaks, other than one of the prime pillars of New Architects, is to study alternative social construction and intentional communities and eco-villages, and to look outside of the current social and psychological world that people are given, especially in the first world, in a consumer capitalist society, all the depredations and compromises that occur for the person and for society in general. So my father, who is 68 and a retired state worker, has a really interesting life story and recently lost a really good friend that he grew up with. And this friend, my Uncle Will, lived in Germany and was a teacher of Southern American literature in German, and also was one of the last people that knew ancient Runic and Norse, and was just kind of like a polymath with a lot of linguistic ability. He would always come back to Virginia every summer, and he and my dad would go camping, go studying things in dusty libraries, or just go float down the river in canoes and all that. And he's a really good friend and mentor. But some of his students in Germany were excited about B.F. Skinner and asked him about that. And he was like, "What is this?" And Uncle Will told his father, who is a gentleman named George Waller, who was another Richmond native and an amazing small man with a big booming voice, and would be kind of like a grandfatherly figure in my life, I guess. But he went there first. So this man, who was about 15 years deceased, and might have been about 80 when he went by himself to Twin Oaks and took a tour. And these are all, Southern folk who grew up before desegregation, grew up during massive resistance in working class East, of course segregated white Richmond at the time. And all of these men have popped out of the swamp of the racism and the bigotry and all of the things that unfortunately a lot of their cohort and their generation possess just by default, just by never having the moment to question and to take a chance and to grow in a way that they all majestically did. So my father and Uncle Will went there about 8 years ago and had an amazing experience. And so my dad is we recorded a lot of his observations the second time going to Twin Oaks last Saturday, and what he thought about it, and what he liked, and what it means for a man born in the 40s, and living in the South his whole life in Richmond, Virginia, and the things that he sees about Twin Oaks that are extremely worthwhile and good. And although my father's politics are constantly evolving, and we have more in common now than than maybe a lot of fathers and sons do, he's obviously very different and comes from a different perspective. And I think a lot of times when radicals and people from countercultures, like Jason and I, talk about ideas, you only get one view, and or you get two slightly different views. You get a lot of enthusiasm and all that. But we wanted to bring men like my dad into this conversation for the generational point of view, and also because Twin Oaks speaks beyond just our generation and just the way that we see the struggle for change in the world. So I guess that's why we interviewed my dad, and also he can tell some good stories. And he survived cancer recently, so it's really nice to know that I have this archive of his voice.
Yeah, it's awesome. What I think is really, really amazing, outside of the wonderful conversations we had with him that night, is the fact that with you and I and Miley and your dad and your mom going back to Twin Oaks, it's kind of like carrying out this tradition that's happened. That's kind of not really set out to be tradition, but it's kind of been handed down multiple generations now.
Right, and almost in a way when no one knew it, like the idea that Uncle Will's father, Mr. Walker, would be the pioneer, at least as far as the people that we know, going out to this place, and then my dad and Uncle Will going out to this place that they probably would have associated with like hippies back in the 60s. And my dad, of course, wasn't a hippie, and neither was Uncle Will, and they were struggling, trying to afford a good university, trying to figure out what career they could have that could get them out of the East End and get them off a construction site. And my dad will tell you a lot of stories about that if you like them, and they're good. They're really good. But basically, they didn't have the wherewithal or the means to tune in and drop out. And even though they had a lot of questions and they had a lot of the same, maybe some of the same feelings that a lot of the hippies of the 60s counterculture did, it really was a class divide. And the way that hippies and beatniks were perceived is that they had the privilege to access these ideas, to drastically change their life, and still have some support and resources. And if you didn't have the option to ask those questions and to change yourself. But instead of holding that as like some kind of badge of bitterness, or this team versus that team, my dad just sees it as like a longer game. And I think in a lot of ways he's, finding a lot of those ideas, and even maybe better versions of them now, in his later years as a retired gentleman. So, but yeah, I think that the generational idea is really amazing. And the fact that we didn't really know what was happening to us, kind of like mass subconscious, like the anthropology that happens when anyone gets together.
Yep, I think it's great. And we could talk about it all night, but let's ask your dad.
True.
Let's get your dad on.
Awesome. Here's me and Jason talking to my dad after the Twin Oaks visit.
We were at Twin Oaks today. The long-awaited end of the summer trip finally happened.
Yes, and it was very good. Things had changed a little bit, I think, for the better, since I think it was 2007, the last time that I was there.
And you and my Uncle Will, rest in peace, got excited about it because of B.F. Skinner's Walden 2.
That's right, and Will had actually talked to people in Europe that had experience at or whatever. A lot of his graduate students had been, I'm saying a lot, anyways, several, from the way that he spoke of it, had been involved in several of these idealistic community things, and then he found out about Twin Oaks, perhaps from one of them. said, well, haven't you, you're from Richmond, Virginia. That's not far from Twin Oaks. Why don't you go there? He came and said, John, let's go out and see this place. In fact, he'd heard about it and he mentioned it to his father. George Walker had gone out there the year before and on his own. And anyway, he told Will, he said, you've got to go see this place. And so anyway, Will gets back. And so we went out there one Saturday afternoon. And we went out there in much the same kind of a day. And, they had a lot of watermelons around. In fact, and I scored one then, just like I did today.
That's the only reason he goes out there is for watermelons, right?
Yeah, my southern background, no doubt. But it's, at that time, there was a female personages who was showing, it was just Will now. And anyway, it turns out that she had an advanced degree in philosophy and languages and spoke some Greek. So anyway, she and Will went off to, occasionally we get in some yammering in Greek, and so I kind of left my own devices a few times. I kind of looked around, snooped around, and all, and it was quite interesting. But
I feel like it's bigger. It's slightly bigger. They've expanded with more buildings and more like homemade industries.
Yes, the thing that I was so interested in and was so impressed with even the last time, and more so this time, was their investment in solar energy. And this time, what was just remarkable was a huge photovoltaic set of solar cells that's right in the field, and they feed that into the grid or back against the counter of the electric grid. So therefore, what they produce can offset what they purchase from Virginia Electric Power Company, and that works for them. Our host, the fellow, he didn't seem to be too impressed with it and all, but I really was, and he seemed to have interest in other things, but they were interesting also.
He was really good at explaining. Was it the planning management planning process, which he said was the only thing that they really kept from B.F. Skinner's Walden 2.
Right.
They weren't really behavioralists after the first year. They just kind of just found a process that evolved with the nature of the community revealed itself. And it's kind of like the free schools, the education movement, where it's the community absorbs and trains itself in the knowledge that it needs, and it doesn't tie itself to an ideology. It's not like a reactive thing as much as it is. It's something that leads itself, and it's cool as far as the breakdown of top-down authority. I mean, this is even a breakdown of hierarchy within a system of ideas.
Oh, I think it embodies a lot of the ideals of anarchism, in that you want to have as little leadership as possible and the most input from the very ground floor. That's altogether an interesting and desirable thing, I think, at least in terms of having a comfortable civilization to live in. He also went on a bit about the fact that they selected people who would come and visit with them for, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks that they would live there, and then they would then be disinvited. They would leave for about 10 days. And at which time, I guess a committee of some sort, anyway, we get together and interview those people in the membership that had actually interacted with this applicant, and then therefore he put it that they didn't have to throw anybody out that way. They just could tell them they couldn't come in. And some of the things that he put forth that would not put a person in good standing there would be if a person had a powerful driving ideology, perhaps, or a real abrasive personality, someone maybe evangelical about. So that was my take on it. And which to me is pretty good. There's just too many people that know how they want to run the world.
I think that the encouragement of balance and the emphasis on compromise was, I mean, it was very utilitarian, but at the same time, it didn't drown out ideas or innovation. I brought that up to Shal when we were speaking to him earlier. It really seems like the place has, there seems to be, because I think one of the truest, untaintable natures of humanity is an ever-evolving, ever-reaching need for freedom, and a freedom that is also egalitarian and involves creativity and communication. I mean, that's the thing that brings us joy, and also helps make our civilizations work. And so they don't seem to have too many forces running against that. They don't have extreme ideology. They don't allow for extreme temperaments. And of course, like he said, the people that want to be there are going to have a certain kind of personality, and not all the same exact kind, but there's going to be things in common and goals in common.
I think so. There was a great deal of attention put in the mathematics of what they would have in the way of the carrying capacity of their group. And 100 was the number that they settled on, with 15 children, no more. And also they even had an average age. They had already looked at old people like me are a little bit less productive than younger ones. Of course, real young ones are kind of stupid, so they're not too productive either. So they seem to think about 40 years old was right at the cusp. And
well, even though he was 61.
Yeah, right. Well, he was well past his cusp, but but he had made his bones for 30 years. So.
And so, but you get an hour off from the weekly work total for each year of age past 42.
Yes.
So he had 12 hours extra freedom.
13 hours.
13.
Yeah,
right,
you count from first on.
Yeah.
And that sounds really good. I would hardly even be turning a hand there, would I? But it is interesting that he spoke of their retirement situation, their pension. I think he called it. Well, what do they call it? But anyway, they have a provisions and a plan that takes care of really old people. But apparently they do seem to have some people there that, I suppose are up there. Did you happen to catch any ages that were put about? The first time I went through, I did see a lady that had a walker, and she had gray hair and so forth, and but seemed to have a very cheerful disposition. I mean, she could have just been somebody in the late 50s that got kind of banged up and whatever. Right. But then again, she could have been in the late 70s. I don't know.
People there seem kind of, even if they claim to be old, the folks that we saw there, they seem unnaturally youthful.
That is true. But I want to throw in a non-alternative community idea. Do you think what they're doing when it comes to age groups, whether it's young or old, do you think it is an ageist viewpoint? Do you think that it's a form of discrimination, or do you think it's actually an intelligent way to approach a situation?
I think your last view on it is what I share. I think that is the pragmatic way to view the thing. And they have to do their numbers. Seems like if they have, and they have faults, but it might be that one of the faults that they have is they are consumed by a numerical analysis of age and sexes and work and splitting up the work, such I think it was 42.1 hours per week. And I don't quite know how they can put those numbers that closely to something like that. Now I was a scientist, and at some point, you don't carry the decibels out but so far because they don't have meaning at a certain point. But nonetheless, they're trying to make it an egalitarian society, and that's the most pragmatic way that you can do it. And when they look at the productivities, I think I have every feeling that that's what they did, that they looked at that pretty hard to see maybe some people in their mid-50s really couldn't stand up to the rigors of working in the tofu factory where it's very hot and confining and standing on concrete floors. He himself said he wasn't really very good at that, but even at a very lively 61. But it's I think they're the kind of folks, though, that look very carefully, and the way that their governing structure is set up, it enables them to do, I think, about as good as you can do with stuff like that. The Skinnerian management system, I was always impressed with that. And if there's one thing that was solid that came out of Skinner's utopia, I believe that's it. It is democratic. But it has leadership. Ultimately, there will be 3 people, or 5 sometimes, that will come down and make a decision after they've gotten every scrap of everybody's comments and whatnot thrown at them. And by God, somebody has to make a decision, and they do. And I guess that the way that they approach the age, back to you, is from a lot of input, and I'm sure they heard from old folks and young folks and the rest of it. I would have some confidence in outcomes like that in general society, in our otherwise bourgeois lifestyle. Nothing decisions are never made like that, and so that's a nice thing with it.
Yeah, I think the fact that they keep fine-tuning the community and trying to expand their industries and also reduce their carbon footprint at the same time, and still have this emphasis on kind of the social psychology of the place, and it's almost a subtext, but like to improve the community, to improve opportunities for socialization and for new ideas, for people to be challenged and brainstorm solutions to problems big and small as a community. It's huge, and I think that's the thing that does not. It's not just a question of whether the utilitarian structure of hours and economics and shared enterprise work. It's also how that affects the mentality and the emotional well-being and the psychic footprint of an intentional community. I think that's one thing that I got out of Twin Oaks that seems like they've got that nearly perfected. I mean, and humans are a bunch of imperfect, challenging beings as it is, but they really did. That is something that is woven in deep. Maybe even more than being consumed with numbers. They definitely have an idea of how to try and get along and be a family of 100.
Yes, I think that is, and maybe here that's the only intentional community that I know of, and they have any insight in at all. And certainly, it's quite possible there are some that do it better, but that's not bad, and it has great appeal for someone of an avowed socialist leaning, as I do, and it's about as good as I can imagine. I don't know that that's really utopia, but it's coming pretty close.
It's closer than what we have right now.
It beats the hell out of what's going on in Tuckahoe Village. But, I think so, and you just. Well, it's an emotional kind of a feeling that you get when you think about the hundreds of people that have been sojourners in that community since 1967. I don't know the numbers, but I'm imagining that there have been gosh, I don't know, 500, maybe 1,000 people that have come in and stayed a few years and whatever left, moved her out and all like this. And all these social connections that have been made and ideals and people being educated. Another facet on this, and there's something that Will and I talked about 4 years ago, was the children. With just 15 children and 100 adults, that is roughly about maybe about 10, in other words, 10 times as many mostly well-educated, well-meaning adults are raising, in other words, a 10 to 1 raising one child. And there was an article that was in our local conservative paper 2 or 3 years ago, and it was an interview of two young women, one going to, I think, somewhere on the West Coast, and some other was going somewhere on the East Coast, but anyway, very standing places, and they were interviewed. Gosh, well, how does it feel? What do your roommates and all think when all of a sudden, oh, you were born and raised in a hippie community, and they said, well, we usually don't even get into it. We'd rather not have that discussion with everybody because everybody wants to know, and it gets kind of boring for us. But the thing is, and they both put this, was that for all those years, though, and one of them put it that they could fill my head until it busted just about, because we had an engineer, we had lawyers, we had people advanced degrees in all the languages and physical sciences and the rest of it, and psychology and music. And these people were all like real close uncles and aunts that were available anytime. And there's no finer education than that. And I reflect on that. That's Will and I had talked about that thing earlier. My God, suppose you were raised by a group of people like that. And it's true. Will's father and mother were outstanding musicians, and Mr. Walker was an outstanding scientist too. Just a real, just an outstanding person. But no wonder Will was so gifted. But it goes on, and his thing was that, my God, these people were all like my father. Suppose I'd had that many people priming me and mentoring me. And I said, my head would have been busted long before yours, I'm sure.
Do you think it's, what are your thoughts of that, of all the founders, of the kids that actually grew up there and lived their entire life, or left? What do you think that says about the community, or do you think, does it say anything at all? I mean,
I don't know quite what to make of that. None of them that grew up there stayed there. I think except one he mentioned, but and I didn't think to ask the question, or maybe it was said and I missed it. But I'm not certain though that those that perhaps like these two young women may have gone off, gotten their degrees, and you got to go somewhere to get these things. Well, maybe they came back when they were 30 years old and had masters or PhDs in something or other, and wanted to come back. And
maybe they're on their way back.
Yes, and but I don't know the answer to that question. I would think if they felt that strongly about their upbringing there, they might well be motivated to come back and raise their children there.
Or also perhaps build another community, and have the fact that this is a part of their lives, and the fact that also that these communities are known, and not all of them are, and I think a lot of them, maybe they don't benefit the world by being an example. They sort of declare themselves by invisibility. Maybe they feel too threatened by the outside world on some level, or that there's just too many distractions, and they don't need to hire a PR team to represent because they're not looking for that many new members. And but I do think that basically these places can teach the rest of civilization maybe more than just a thing or two, about how to have something equitable, and how to have a life that is fulfilling and satisfying, and not just about isolation, competition, and the collecting of worthless things and being in debt and all of that. There's a very life in the present truthfulness about it, and I think that's what those two young women were carrying into the world, and then, and maybe that's a good thing, that all the kids that were brought up with those values and in those environments with all these aunts and uncles, like honestly, like a whole village raising the kids, can go out and be just really, really empowered and show and have this other view of life.
Yeah.
So kind of like a breeding ground to save the world type thing.
Well, just to add the diversity of thought, and maybe I would say, a degree of emotional balance and centeredness that their peers in the same universities that jump through the same loops in private and public academic educational institutions to get to that. Maybe don't have that sense of balance and that sense of confidence. Well, even if they have that, they don't have that sense of self, and I think that those communities have a much greater chance of letting someone's identity bloom and not just be breaking apart ship in a storm, because that's, I think, what adolescence is for most American kids. That, and even the most loving two parents can't, in a standard context, protect the growing up child, young adult, from the ferocity of the world, but I do think I think there's a certain amount of being inclined to seek these ideas out, and then once you find out that these ideas are also places where 100 people live and have said we're not, it's an amazing thing, because they're not accepting the authority of the governing economy. They're not accepting the authority of the nation state and the weaponization of everyday life and the commodification of their own intellect to serve a corporate master or a government master, to have the product of their working days be lifted away from them so easily and so eagerly by these hierarchies. They don't have that at these communities. It goes right back to the people around them who are their peers, always.
Well, I think in as much as it's humanly possible, they really have achieved something there, and it's inspiring, even for those of us that, I don't know, we've already accumulated some crap, and we've just got to, I don't know, it just, we are where we are, but it is interesting, though, that there was one community that Jason referred to in Georgia that was inhabited by people who were very poor and needed to get together as a commonwealth to to get things to eat and to join together and to live, and whereas Twin Oaks would have to be a collection, for the most part, of bourgeois people that did a lot of thinking about it and probably scandalized their parents and went off to live in a place like that. Although, if my son had gone off 20 years ago and done that, I was beginning to come around a little bit, but it would have been a little bit hard to take, and that he was throwing away all this tremendous wealth that I could put at his disposal to go forward with, because I came from an environment of great scarcity, and good God, to throw away a college education, to do those kind of things, that was a rather remarkable thing.
I did a version of that. It was sort of the scattered intentional community of punk rock in a global context, which is filled with a lot of relevance and a lot of windows into political and social thought, and certainly like a sense of self-knowledge and an anti-authoritarian streak, which is extremely positive and healthy, I think, for a lot of folks. I would say that, but I'm sure it scared the bejesus out of my parents.
Well, that's all right. You said it only took me 2 years to get down off the ceiling. I got there though. It was quite a remarkable time. At any rate, though, yeah, we got there, and really, I'm very glad the way things have turned out for you. Because
a lot of sons don't get the opportunity to hear their father say something so generous. So I definitely got lucky and was born to the right people.
I mean, behaviorism, that's an interesting thing. But I think, though, that I think events do make us, you just can't escape it. They kind of make you what you are. Like I was telling Jason earlier that I don't care if universal health care bankrupts the country 5 times over. Let it happen. Because my own experience with all that. And but it took quite a few years because, see, I was from a very conservative Southern family, hunting and fishing and, we'd even
segregation.
Segregation, dirt tracks, NASCAR, the whole thing.
Yeah, sure.
And I really liked it, but my parents weren't all just that. I mean, they were both 8th grade dropout, and they met each other when they were 14 and 15 years old, working in the woolen mill in Charlottesville. Pop had early age, child labor, and they were there. My mom was an operator of a loom, and Pop already washed out the wool and stuff like that, and then they had to quit school like back in the 8th grade to keep their families going. Everybody was out of work. No, the Great Depression was a real hell, and it was really bad. And I know the conditions we've got now look like they're heading that way, but that was a super disaster. And I don't know. I didn't study economics. I just hope for the best.
We didn't study. We're just getting destroyed by it. It's just getting played by other people's vampiric attachment to the wealth that belongs to all of us.
But that's the thing,
decades.
In a small community like 100 people, where okay, you got enough diversity there. Yeah, true. I didn't see many black people. I saw one, but anyway, I assume there might be a few more. But where you have enough diversity of intellect and background, and the will to really live together, and to do it with, say, I've got enough stuff. Got a room, got a desk, got a bed, got some shoes, got this.
I love that on the shoe budget.
Yeah.
Well, with the story that you're telling that, your parents quit school at 8th grade so they could take care of,
the parents and their families.
How does that contrast to what people like in Twin Oaks are doing? I mean, is that a privilege for modern society, middle class, or is it a kind of going back to that element of we need to give up what we feel is important, staying in school, doing whatever, and taking care of our family, whether our family's immediate or the 100 people.
The 100. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Maybe that makes life a little bit more real. But it's this one-upmanship constantly about our material possessions and degrees. Oh, yeah. I mean, people near and dear to me say, oh, my gosh, boy, oh, boy, my son is now getting his master's degree and all, and he's really, he's moving up in the corporation. He's making 6 figures. And, of course, I don't really want to hear this shit. but I tell him, that's wonderful. That's good. I'm glad for him. I'm glad he's not on welfare. But we are compelled to compete in this thing in possessions and in degrees and in all these accoutrements of life. Whereas the people at Twin Oaks, now, yeah, sure, a lot of them have already been down the road and found that there's no pot of gold at the end of that particular rainbow, and thought about the matter and said, hell, I'm not having any of that thing. I don't need all that crap. And this is the pot of gold. This is, and I can come home after a day's work, And if I didn't like the way it was going yesterday, or I didn't like the people that are involved over there, well, I'll go over here and I'll work in the waste management section tomorrow, or I'll do, the garden or whatever. And that looks like a good way to live.
And it seems like the level of lateral skill sharing that occurs with the chores rotating and stuff. I mean, you learn so much about everything. Everyone becomes an expert in everything, and trusts each other and the body of knowledge just because of necessity and because of sharing and because of the particular the social weight of being decent to each other, just so we can get the job done, just so we can communicate, and then we can also have recreation after this. Like, I just think it's not just like get in the cubicle, plug in, compete, kiss up to the boss, snarl at your other cubicle mates because you can't possibly have anything else in common because you're the best one there. Like, that is such a pathological and juvenile and unfortunately extremely commonplace modern American adult personality it's the main reason why everything's going to shit, I think.
Well, as a lowercase Christian, and I am, I see it as it's greed. It's greed from my level and greed on up to the top. It was an amazing thing. And no, my parents, as I've said, they were 8th grade dropouts and all the rest of it. But it did not really stop them, and it's one thing that really influenced me a whole lot. No, they would pick up, they would read, all the books, The Grapes of Wrath, different things like this, and even some Shakespeare and Omar Khayyam, and they would constantly throw out snippets and couplets of things, and I think anyway they did not. They never had a chance to really experience their potential. I'm sure their IQs are probably bigger than mine. I mean, they just, but they did pretty damn good, though. A lot of people from working class tend to look down on their parents. At least I hear that, but I didn't. I'd put them anywhere. I just that they were heroic.
I feel like that being an autodidact or whatever, teaching yourself beyond the limits of your ability to participate in public education jumped down to me, because that's definitely been my course of self-education. It's just been trying to pick up on the things that interested me and find the teachers that could teach me the things that I needed to learn.
Well, you're very much like your granddad and your grandmother. They just taught themselves. They just picked up the books and read it themselves and went on. But it kind of helps, to have credentials and a degree and stuff like that to move on up and get up in this bourgeois society here I'm trying to get you into, son.
I think we're too late on that. We'll just take our bikes and go to Twin Oaks, Dad.
Yeah.
But, or Findhorn or another spot. Or maybe just stay in the world here, but have a set of values that can pass on a little bit of hope and inspiration to people who have finally burned out of the rat race and realized that they weren't really going anywhere, and trying to reclaim their identities from all the pain and exploitation and extraction of power that the system provides, and try to rewrite something. What is that Omar Khayyam poem that I'm sure both my grandparents knew? Would thou and I with fate conspire to grasp the sorry scheme of things entire? Would not we shatter it to bits and then remold it nearer to the heart's desire?
Yes, indeed. That it was 1,000 years ago, and the stuff still is really good, no matter how you translate it. It's good. Well, I'm glad that y'all both got a chance to see it. Of course, I didn't know that Jason was really doing an academic thing about this, and somebody's got to do it.
And I don't know why he would put it on our shoulders.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure how academic this is, but someone does have to do it, and many other people are doing it simultaneously, which is exciting. And New Architects is just inspired by all the other alternative media, anarcho-journalists, whatever funny word we can come up to describe this trying not to be self-indulgent podcast. but it was a pleasure to have you, Jason, and interview my dad and have those conversations too, because I feel like it's rare. I mean, it's rare that people can reflect on something that is changing them in real time, that ideas operate in our minds. And if we open ourselves up to them, there's that much more of a benefit of peace and a sense of strength, and evolving creativity as a human condition is really important. And it's good to know that people who are older and have gone through different experiences, like my dad, and like everybody's dad, had the capability and the potential to participate and be as vital. In some ways it's like very, very old school, like listening to the elders speak around the fire, but I think a lot of people, I feel like with changes in technology and the changes in the world, it's very hard to relate to people older than them, even by like 15 years, much less 30.
Well, that's what I found really fascinating about the whole experience. I mean, not only, like as I said before, it was wonderful to be able to experience these stories, because I know you grew up pretty much your whole life. You said something like every 4 years you hear these stories, and this is my first time to experience them and to see the passion, to see the history, and then put it to the fact that, okay, we grew up, you and me, we grew up within the punk culture and the anarchist culture or whatever.
Right.
And it's always people our age, maybe people a couple years older. And, we're passing around, booklets and, whatever it is that we're getting our information from, and we're organizing protests. It really took it out of the realm of it being to hear the words that we've talked about our whole life be talked about from somebody with such life experience. I mean, because there's more to it than just the Twin Oaks that we talked about. There's such an in-depth life experiences, something that I could never ever relate to, just because they're so individual. I mean, their life as it is.
We'll be hearing more from my dad about other topics and ideas that will be in future New Architects broadcasts. There'll be like a my dad archive coming in, giving us his 2 cents on other ideas, including the military-industrial complex, and the way that history felt to him as it was really happening, for sure. And I think it's really important too, and revolutionary, to build bridges with elders, and not even just blood relatives, but other folks, and there's probably somebody who can enrich your life and tell you an amazing story and give you such a good perspective and change your heart for the better. In a nursing home right now, or lonely in the house, or under a bridge, or just having fun on their boat, retired. It was just, other more kind of classic American retired dad ideas. But there's so much to be learned, and I think it's important. But also, it's neat to see people implementing these ideas. I mean, if Twin Oaks wasn't there, none of this. It's right down the street from Richmond, which is crazy. But it feels like a world away. What I thought was amazing about Twin Oaks is that they talked about the Federation of Intentional Communities, of egalitarian intentional communities, having like a fund, like a disaster insurance that they all. Yeah. So if like a member needs open heart surgery, or like a flood washes away an entire community, or there's just disaster of individual or collective kind, all these groups all over the world have this like shared collective insurance policy to help each other. That's just very practical and very cool, and it's just once again like, wow, they thought of everything.
Yeah, it's not just like a bunch of hippies wanting to run around nude and smoke weed. This has purpose to it. Even if you don't believe in living in a community, because there's a lot of people within our circles that would not live there. But what you can take away from it is the knowledge that, no matter what situation it is, we can get through it together. We can work together. We don't need the confinements and the restrictions that are put on us of where we have to be, wage slaves, or where we have to be, whatever it is that we see is wrong in the world. We can actually together we got into this mess. Together we can get out. I mean, it's, but it's a long way.
That's a wrap. I couldn't think of a better way to say it. That's awesome.
So I mean, I think that's a lesson to be learned. Another thing that we should take away from this is it's great for us to rap back and forth about ideas and dissect ideas and stuff. But it's even more important, and I think we've learned that firsthand through all this, is to talk to people who we don't think, personally, that we don't think would share our ideas or even be in the same boat as us in terms of philosophy and worldviews, and actually talk to them, because you'll be amazed of how...
I've had some good friends talk about how anything that is old enough to become an ism or an ology is old enough to start being less relevant. It has death in it.
Yeah.
Moving ideas past their ability to be defined academically, or creating new things constantly, and they can be hybrids, and they can have roots, and sometimes really old good ideas that have been forgotten for generations can come back. But I think having that in mind is extremely important. But yeah, I think the freshness is a good thing to try and achieve.
Yeah, it totally is. So let me plug the website. Even if you don't want to live in a community like that, go visit twinoaks.org and just learn about what they're doing. You may not agree with everything they're doing. You may not agree with minor details or bigger details, but the fact that they're doing it says a lot. I mean,
since 1967.
Yeah.
That's like 3 generations of people. That's like they've had to deal with. It's an alternative way of looking and living with the earth, and it's not. I mean, it's not like 17th century house either. I mean, it's like state of the art photovoltaic, solar power.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's beyond state of the art, but at the same time, it's barefoot in the garden, and working 4 or 5 hours a day, and having time, having time to reflect and comfort, and just, but not like the comfort of like 1,000 gadgets and like getting the newest thing that, the TV told you needed to get to feel alive.
Yeah.
None of that is in play there. Instead, it's a life of the mind and a life of like, the body in the earth, like there, like tucked into those woods by the river. And there's a lot of beauty to that for sure.
Yeah. Well, excellent. I want to thank everybody for listening. I know we've gone over our allotted time that we like to give ourselves.
You guys are heroes. Anyone that's still with us, and it's been more than an hour, but most of our things are more than an hour. Heroes, I say.
Yes. It's awesome.
You should get a New Architects Heroes shirt, but we don't make shirts.
You're like, we're going to marketize this. We're going to...
You need the magnets for their fridge.
You need the magnets. You need the shoes. You need...
That's true. All right, man. Well, look, thanks for listening, everybody. And Jason, thank you again for being such a disciplined documentarian. And we'll catch up with y'all next time.
Excellent. Have a good night.